Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is Adam Fishman, Executive Director of American Friends of Likud. I want to welcome you all to our exclusive conference call briefing today with the Jerusalem Post Senior Diplomatic Correspondent Herb Keinon. Our moderator today is our President Club member from the West Coast, Steve Goldberg. He's going to be introducing Herb and is going to be also fielding all the questions. And once again, if you have any questions, we have some that have been sent to us by email info@aflikud.org. We'll try to get to all of them. You can send them during the call as well. We'll do our best to have them asked. Right now, I just want to say last bit, and that is if you have not yet made your commitment to American Friends of Likud, you can go ahead to aflikud.org and do it right from our website. We need your help so we can continue doing these type of exclusive conference calls and, of course, all of our other events. I'm now going to turn it over to Steve to introduce Herb. We'll hear from Herb, and then we'll get to some of our questions on the very interesting news of the day, of the week, of what we've been hearing from Washington, from Jerusalem. So I'll turn it over to you, Steve.
Okay, it's my privilege to introduce Herb Keinon. Just some highlights of his career. He's been with the Jerusalem Post for more than 30 years. He's been the diplomatic correspondent since August of 2000, right after the Camp David summit with Bill Clinton and Arafat and Barack failed, and right before the Second Intifada starting September of that year. As a diplomatic correspondent, Herb travels with the Prime Minister and sometimes with the Foreign Minister. He's been with Ehud Barak to Paris. He's been with Prime Minister Sharon when he went to Crawford, Texas to meet with George W. Bush. He's been with Prime Minister Omar to Annapolis, and he's been with Prime Minister Netanyahu to Beijing and Entebbe. He lectures around the world. He's originally from Denver. Went to school at University of Colorado Boulder, then with a master's in journalism from University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana, and he's lived in Israel for about 35 years and lives in Ma'ale Adumim. And with that, I introduce Herb and ask if you can make sort of your comments and first impressions on what's going on with Jerusalem right now.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. Good afternoon there. Look, it's obviously, a very exciting time right now. I mean, it looks like at long last after, 1995, 22 years since Congress passed the Jerusalem law that something's actually going to happen now. And the president is going to make some kind of announcement regarding an intention to move the embassy. This you all know from reading the news today. What's interesting is we're getting a lot of this from the Palestinians, the Jordanians, and the Egyptians. The president apparently called Abu Mazen, he called Sisi in Egypt, he called Abdullah, and he called Netanyahu to express an intention to move the embassy. Now, the reason I'm stressing the word intention is because we don't know exactly what that means yet. Right? We don't know what he's going to announce tomorrow. He apparently made it clear to them that he intends to move the embassy, but the whole question about when he's left up in the air, and that's a big question. The when question is a big question. I think he might have intentionally left that up in the air in an attempt to give him some wiggle room, some maneuverability tomorrow when he makes this announcement to say, well, it's not happening immediately. It'll take some time. And during that time, kind of buy himself some time to tamp down the Arab anger that we've already seen. That Abu Mazen's threatening that this is going to end the peace process or the diplomatic process. There's all kinds of threats of violence. I think that it's interesting that he didn't say he's going to do it tomorrow. He intends to do it. I think he wants to prepare the ground a little bit better than perhaps has been done in the past. What's interesting as well is that there's complete radio silence in Jerusalem. All the statements today about what Trump did or did not say are coming from the Arab capitals. They come from Ramallah. They're coming from Amman. They're coming from Cairo. Netanyahu hasn't said anything. In fact, he's also told his ministers, don't talk about this issue. He's keeping things very quiet. I don't think he wants to be seen as being the force behind this, make this seem as it's an internal American decision taken with their own considerations in hand. But again, there's a lot of expectation. a lot of excitement. Netanyahu is actually going to be speaking at the Jerusalem Post conference tomorrow, which is great timing because obviously he's got to address the issue. With all the excitement, however, I think we also have to kind of be sober and realistic to a degree. And if indeed Trump says that he's going to move the embassy, or even if he just says he's going to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital without moving the embassy, but that doesn't look as the direction he's going. It looks like he will say he intends to move the embassy. There are no free lunches, right? He's gonna want something in return from Israel. This is something that's obviously going to cost him some political points with the Arab world. Nothing comes without a cost. And I think that we all kind of have to wonder now what the demand is going to be of Israel. What are we going to have to pay for getting this thing that we've been, saying that we want for so very long now? So that's kind of my opening, comments about what's happening right now. Again, what's interesting is we don't know that much. We know there's going to be a speech, or we think there's going to be a speech tomorrow. But the content of it, what exactly he's going to say, is very much up in the air, and that's important, right? That's important. How he frames this, how he frames it. Is this a recognition of united Jerusalem? Will he say West Jerusalem? Will he say East Jerusalem? Or will he just say that Jerusalem is Israel's capital without defining things? All those details are very important about how it will be received in the Arab world, how it will be received on the streets. And then hovering above this all, of course, is the threat of violence. Is this going to lead to violence? What can be done to stop the violence? That's an interesting question. Again, a lot of that has to do with preparing the ground. One would think that the Americans have had a lot of time to deal with this, so that they've talked to the Palestinians, the Jordanians, the Egyptians, trying to warn them not to stir the pot too much, not to let this thing get out of control. But there definitely is, concern that there's going to be protests and these, perhaps riots, and they can get out of control, and you don't know where it's going to go. So it's an exciting time right now, but there's a lot of questions still hanging out there.
I'm going to start with the first question. How widespread or universal even is the support in Israel for this move, if that's what Trump does? Is this does this cross party lines even to the left?
Yes. It pretty much all the way, except maybe for Meretz. I'm not sure. I haven't heard what Meretz's positions on this. I heard Herzog today. Herzog came out, very, very strongly that Jerusalem is the capital of the Jewish people for the last 3,000 years and the capital of Israel for the last 70 years, and this is something that's long in the making. I think Avi Gabay has also came out with similar comments. Nobody is going to come out politically in Israel against it because it's not politically wise. I mean, the sense is that the Israeli public, this is something that resonates very, very, very deeply with them, something they want, and no politician is going to want to go against the grain on that. Again, because it's also you're not exactly saying where the borders of Jerusalem are, even if you're from labor, right, or the Zionist Union. You're not necessarily having to define the borders. It's kind of apple pie, motherhood and apple pie declaration. Yes, Jerusalem is the capital. Nobody's not going to say that because there would be a backlash politically.
Assuming this happens, do you have any sense as to what the other governments around the world are going to do in response? Whether it's European nations.
I think it's interesting to note that if Trump actually goes out and does this, or even just recognizes Jerusalem as Israel's capital, he's not the first guy to do it. Putin did it in April. What was interesting about Putin's announcement in April is, he said, we are now recognizing West Jerusalem as Israel's capital, although we believe that in the final negotiated deal, East Jerusalem should be the capital of an independent Palestinian state. But still, that was kind of, he went across the Rubicon there. He broke new ground. And what was interesting about that is nobody batted an eyelid, right? An eyelash. Nobody said boo. Nobody threatened that they're gonna stop talking to the Russians or that they're gonna protest, because that's just not how you deal with Russia. Those types of threats don't work. So there is a precedent for it. Specifically to your question, how will other governments react? Look, I mean, right now, you've got France who's, warned Trump against it. You've got Germany who's warned Trump against it. I don't see Western Europe falling into line. Although, if he sets this precedent right now, some of the countries in the EU who want to align their policy closely with America. I'm talking specifically about the Eastern and Central European countries like the Czech Republic, like Slovakia, like Lithuania, like Romania, like Bulgaria. It's not inconceivable that when the dust settles, they'll follow suit. I don't imagine that'll happen immediately. Then there's also the case of the countries in Latin America who had an embassy here for many years, but then withdrew it after Israel, formally the Knesset, declared Jerusalem as its capital. They might move back. I would imagine that there would be a degree of trickle down, although I don't think it's going to happen immediately. I think it'll take some time. But definitely, this is a very significant move that can open the doors to other countries who might have an inclination to doing this, but were afraid to do it on their own.
You mentioned concerns of violence, and I believe the Palestinians have also already announced there are going to be 3 days of rage. Hamas is threatened a new intifada. Are you aware of security steps being taken already to make sure that any such violence is contained and that the population is protected?
Look, I'm not the military correspondent, so I'm not getting their statements or beeps right now. But I think it's safe to assume, right, that Israel has planned for the scenarios. That they have beefed up the security in and around Jerusalem, and that they're aware of what this type of thing could trigger. But these types of things often have a dynamic of their own. And that's something you can't foresee. A lot depends, I think, also the degree of support they're going to get from the Arab countries, right? Like if King Abdullah, Jordan's King Abdullah, who's come out very much against this, if he doesn't stir the pot, if Egypt doesn't stir the pot, if the Saudis don't stir the pot, then Abu Mazen will not have much of a motivation to let the street run wild. Because they could say to him very clearly, you make sure that you get a grip on this and don't let it get out of hand. So I think a lot depends on that. However, on the other side, you have other forces who want it to get out of hand, right? You already heard today in Turkey, Turkey's President Erdogan, he wants to ride this issue to leadership position in the Muslim world, right? I mean, this is he rode the Mavi Marmara in 2010, and this made him the darling of the Arab street, even though he's not an Arab, right? Also, I think he's looking at this issue in the same vein. He can ride this and become the darling of the Muslim world. So it's in his interest, right, that things do get out of hand. If it's in Hamas's interest that things do get out of hand, and it's in Iran's interest that things do get out of hand. So it's a very, very delicate situation. I would just say, though, in general, I mean, Israel has the capacity to deal with this type of stuff. We've dealt with it before. We can deal with it again. This whole threat of another intifada. Nobody wants another intifada. I mean, we definitely don't want another intifada. But you know what? The Palestinians don't want another intifada either, because they know that as much as we could get hurt by it, they'll get hurt by it even more. So I think you might see an outburst of rage that could go on for a couple of days or so. But whether it's going to be something that can continue on and on and on for months and months and months without being nourished by Jordan, by the Saudis, by the Egyptians, I have my doubts. Although, again, I mean, nobody wants to come out and say there's not going to be violence, because what happens if there is violence? You look like a fool. So we have to be careful, but I also think we have to put things and the threats in proportion.
In terms of the, I guess, so-called moderate Arab countries, and with Saudi looking like it's the Saudi Arabia with this new prince looking somewhat promising, and then Egypt and Jordan, they are at least saying that they're against this move. How do you have any sense as to how strongly felt their opposition is, or is it pro forma?
Look, I think now to a certain extent it's pro forma. I mean, I think the objections coming from Egypt and from Saudi Arabia, that's stuff that they have to say for their street, because although for the government it might be pro forma, I don't underestimate the sentiment towards Jerusalem and towards this type of step on the street in their own countries, and they have to respond to the street. So I think they're saying what they have to say. How heartfelt it is, I can't really gauge that. But I imagine that the Americans have worked behind the scenes with the leaders in that country. Like this isn't a lightning bolt that's coming out of the blue, right? We've had like a long time to prepare for this. So I imagine this has come up in conversations with the Saudis and the Egyptians and the Jordanians, and I imagine they know, the Americans' position on this, and they too want it to a certain, and not to a certain degree, but to a great degree, especially now with Iran, especially if you're Jordan or Saudi Arabia right now. You don't want to get on the wrong side of America either by going nuts on this issue, because remember, this isn't something that Israel's doing. This is something the United States of America is doing, and the moderate Sunni states, which you mentioned, they have a need right now to be in America's good graces. So I think they'll push to a certain degree because they have to do that for their publics or for their appearance for their publics. But I think there's probably certain understandings with Washington.
In terms of political ramifications internally, does Netanyahu and does the Likud benefit from this?
That's a good question. Look, Netanyahu is not one who is generally shy about taking credit for things. But what's interesting is you haven't really heard him up until now toot his own horn on this issue. Now that could change once a formal announcement is made, but he hasn't done it yet, and I think he hasn't done it because he doesn't want to make it. He wants this. It's good for Israel that this thing is framed as an American domestic issue, that the Americans are just doing what American law demands that they do, and it's not because of our mission in that they had to do it. I don't think he wants to go down that track, so I'm not sure he's going to toot his own horn on that as loudly as he has on other issues. That being said, look, I think if the U.S. moves its embassy to Jerusalem and we go to elections here in another, say, a year, I think it's definitely going to feature, rather prominently in the campaign spots. Everybody's talking about, how bad Netanyahu's relationship was with Washington under President Obama, and now look, we've got the embassy moved to Jerusalem. That's something that could be used very much to his favor during an election campaign.
What's your sense there, I guess, among Israelis generally, and certainly in the political leadership, about Donald Trump as president?
Oh, that's a small little narrow topic.
Yeah.
Look, first of all, everything is relative, right? So when you speak to those in this government about Donald Trump, it's all in comparison with President Obama. So that's that's your point of comparison. When you look at Trump, look, I mean, I think Netanyahu has to walk a very kind of delicate line here, in that he'll want to embrace, or he has embraced, or he has a desire to embrace Trump's policies on the Middle East without necessarily wanting to embrace the entire Trump package, because that's so divisive in America, and you don't know what's going to come next. So I think what you're seeing is an attempt to kind of embrace his policies on the Middle East. But even when you look at his policies in the Middle East, look, there's been certain things that Trump has done on the Middle East which have been terrific for us. Right? I'm talking about something like this. I'm talking about the whole reorientation towards the diplomatic process with the Palestinians. The idea that you can look at things from a different paradigm, that you don't have to keep banging your head against the Oslo wall, time after time after time, hoping for a different result, but you can actually try to do things a little differently. The whole tone coming from the White House, that there's no public daylight between us and Washington, that's a huge, tremendous difference. The thing with Iran, right? The whole, the decertification of the Iran deal, the fact that you had the UN, you had Netanyahu and Trump essentially speaking from the same page on the Iranian issue. Those are things that are obviously very, very, very good and very important for us. However, it's not all sugar and sweetness, right? There are certain things that Trump has done in the Middle East that are not necessarily good for us. And I'll just give you a couple examples. The first has to do with Syria. There was a certain, I think, expectation when Trump came in, and especially after he threw the Tomahawk missiles on Syria in April after the chemical weapons were used by Assad. I think there was an expectation that, hey, America's back in Syria. They're not going to leave it open for the Russians and the Iranians. Unfortunately, what came after that, however, wasn't follow-up. It was like a one-off deal. And after that, the Americans did back away. They didn't support the rebels to the degree that Israel would have liked them to support the rebels. So the vacuum that was created under Obama to a certain degree in Syria, to a certain degree, has continued under Trump. And the Russians and the Iranians and the Hezbollah have been all too willing to fill that vacuum. So that's one issue that, it hasn't all been all great from our perspective. The second issue has to do with the Kurds. You had the referendum in Iraqi Kurdistan, and Israel came out very much in favor of it, and they would have liked to see the U.S. support it. And the fact that it didn't is seen here to a large extent is a big missed opportunity. Some people even compare it to what happened in 2009 in Iran. You remember in Iran in 2009, Obama was just elected. The Iranians go to elections, they're rigged, and the people take to the street by the hundreds of thousands, and Obama doesn't do anything. And everybody says that was a huge missed historical opportunity to throw your support behind those who went out to the streets. I think to a certain degree, you might make the same kind of argument now. You had an historical moment there with the referendum in Kurdistan. Would have been good if the U.S. could have got behind that, because an independent Kurdistan for Israel in this region is obviously something that's very, very important, very good for us, and that moment was past. So there's a lot of good things, right? And there's some things that are less good. One other thing, though, that is very important that I just like to mention, this is in comparison with the previous administration, is one of the problems Israel had with the previous administration is we did not have anybody close to the president who would advocate our cause, right? Especially once Dennis Ross left in 2011, we had nobody close to the president. Now that's no longer the case. Right now you have Mike Pence, who is an incredibly strong supporter of Israel. By the way, he's coming here in a week from Sunday for 2 days. You've got Pence, you've got Kushner, you've got Greenblatt, you've got Nikki Haley. These are all people who've got the attention and the ear of the president and can advocate for us. So that's a very different ballgame than we had in the past.
Talking about, I guess we've wandered a little from Jerusalem, but the issue of Iran and the JCPOA. What is the position of the government on what they're hoping happens to the JCPOA? Do they really want it continued but renegotiated, or do they want it ripped up?
That's an interesting question. Look, I think Netanyahu said this pretty clearly, when he said to the UN, fix it or nix it. And the first thing he said was fix it. I think the preferred preference would be to try to fix the gaps in the deal, because that way you're not pitting the U.S. and Israel against the rest of the world. If you nix the deal, then it's like Israel and the U.S. against everybody else. So I think it would be better from our position if you could just alter the deal to make it that when the sun shines on the deal in 10 or 15 years, we're not back at square one with all bets off, and the Iranians in a better position to race towards a nuclear device. If you can fix that, I think that's the preferred option. If you can't, then Netanyahu has made clear what he thinks, and that's that no deal is better than a bad deal, and this deal is a bad deal.
One last question, and then I'll thank you. Is no one knows exactly what Trump is going to say in his speech tomorrow. Is in the view of the people in the government and in the population, is there a difference between saying, I'm recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital and we will make plans in the future to move the embassy, or what if he just says, he says we're going to start to do it now, or he says we're going to keep our embassy in Tel Aviv, and it makes a Putin-like statement? What's expected, and what will be the different reactions?
Look, I don't think Israel wants to see a Putin-like statement in that he says, well, he recognizes West Jerusalem, but the status of East Jerusalem will be open for negotiation. I don't think that's something that would bring about a whole lot of joy here. But I don't expect that he's going to do something like that. Look, I think the bottom line is Israel, if you're going to go through all this, right, if you're going to do it once and be over with it. Because if he just says he's going to recognize the capital right now, you're still going to have outbursts of violence, perhaps, right? And then those will be over, and then 6 months' time, he's going to say, well, let's move the embassy. Then you're going to have more outbursts of violence. So I think it's easier to just get it all over at once, rather than dealing with it piecemeally. Now, I don't imagine that he's going to say, well, I'll recognize tomorrow, and then another 6 months down the line, he'll give another speech and say, now I'm moving the embassy. My hunch or my inclination from what I've been reading and hearing over the last couple hours is actually tomorrow he will say he intends to move the embassy, which is more than just saying he's going to recognize Israel, Jerusalem as Israel's capital. And again, that's definitely the preferred option in Jerusalem. Do it once, get it over with, and then you can deal with the backlash rather than having to deal with the backlash, over and over and over and over again.
All right. With that, anyway, thank you, Adam. Do you want to take over?
Yeah, just last notes. Again, thank you, Steve, for moderating. Thanks so much, Herb, for joining us. And I want to remind everyone to please go support American Friends of Likud by going to our website, afl.org, www.aflikud.org, and making your contribution there. Thank you very much, Herb. Thank you very much, Steve, and a happy Hanukkah to everyone. We look forward to the news of the next coming days.
Okay. So, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.